Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Canadians are heading to the polls in an election that's been shaped by high living costs and trade tensions with the United States. In their final pitches, Liberal Party leader Mark Carney says his central banking experience will be key in handling Trump's aggressive trade policies. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre accuses the Trudeau government of leaving Canada vulnerable to US tariffs. He further promises to push back firmly on Trump's actions. Canadian politics has long been a battle between the Liberals and Conservatives. Smaller parties like Bloc Québécois and the NDP often hold the balance of power. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who took charge in 2022, champions common sense politics. He criticises the current government for its handling of key issues. Meanwhile, Liberal leader Mark Carney promises steady leadership. He vows to navigate Canada's internal and external affairs. Both parties offer different paths forward for the country. Polling stations are now open across Newfoundland and Labrador. Voters will decide on the next government of Canada in this critical moment of international economic strain. Before heading to the discussion, let's take a look at an update on the latest opinion polls. This is our first opinion poll. Of course, now polling has opened. We won't get any more updates until the exit polls are released. But the Main Street research on April the 27th, showing the Liberal Party of Canada in the lead with 44% of the vote share. Conservative Party, of course, led by Pierre Poilievre with 41%, and the New Democrat Party, who have often had a wider and larger vote share than the ones being seen here, on 6%, alongside Bloc Québécois, others as well, including the Green Party, who normally gain 1 or 2 seats in a Canadian election. Moving on to the CBC poll tracker, also from April the 27th, the day before these polls have opened. Also with a similar picture, the Liberal Party with a 42.8% vote share, the Conservatives with 39.2%, the NDP with slightly more than the previous poll with 8.1%, Bloc Québécois and others as well there shown for you. We'll move on now to our next poll, and again it's a very similar story, this showing a slightly tighter race. However, the Abacus data poll tracker from the day before polls have opened in Canada. 41% for the Liberal Party, almost neck and neck with the Conservatives. NDP on a double figure vote share there with 10%, and Bloc Québécois, whose voting area and voting region will be within Quebec, they're at 6%. Moving on, the Liberal Party of Canada once again leading in this poll from Nanos Research and the CTV, Globe and Mail, also from yesterday, April the 27th, showing a Liberal lead again, but this is tight, and this election race is definitely a two-horse race between the Liberals and the Conservatives. Again, the vote shares on screen, a similar pattern throughout. The NDP with 8% and Bloc Québécois with the 6% that we have been seeing across these opinion polls. Again, the same story with the Liaison Strategies NEP MCC poll. Again, 43% for the Liberals, a slight lead against the Conservatives, the NDP on 7 and Bloc Québécois on 6. That is the polls that we can see, and they are all showing a similar story. That is the Liberal Party, led by Mark Carney, the new Prime Minister. Mark Carney, elected after Justin Trudeau resigned around 6 weeks ago. Mark Carney was chosen as the new leader and the Prime Minister, of course, then calling that snap election. Well, joining us to discuss this election with the polls now open, something we will, of course, be keeping an eye on, is Charles Thompson, an Australian journalist who is joining us from Sydney. Thank you very much, Charles, for taking the time to be with us today. We've looked at the polls there, but I want to go back and really look at these candidates, the faces, the names that we've been talking about, Mark Carney, Pierre, Poilievre, Jagmeet Singh as well. And what can you tell us about the people that are vying to be the next Prime Minister of Canada?
Just like I said with the US election, it's legacy media versus social media. If I watch the mainstream media in Canada, I get a strong feeling that Carney's going to win. And if I watch a lot more of the social media, I think Poilievre is going to win. And I think it's between these two. I think it's quite interesting how the others have fallen back on that. The only proviso I would add is that Trump's complicated everything. So it's a really hard one to call. It's fascinating. And I think we won't know, and nobody can be sure until after the votes are counted.
Yes, Charles, we of course have a different picture that's played out in these opinion polls. From a few months ago, of course, Justin Trudeau's popularity waning, Mark Carney instated as the leader of the Liberal Party and therefore also the Prime Minister. What has been the catalyst in this change of fortunes for the Liberal Party, which in turn has seen Pierre Poilievre go from a clear favourite to behind in the polls?
Well, once again, now I go to social media, because social media, not mainstream media, keeps telling us that the Canadian government heavily subsidizes many of the main broadcasting networks and journalists. Now, maybe there's a Canadian expert on the panel who can debunk that. But if that's true, there's a big push, of course, for mainstream journalism to want the Liberals to win and not for the Conservatives. Because Poilievre has also said that one of the first things he's going to do is stop funding the journalists. So I think that's a big factor. And of course, the other factor is Trump. And nobody can actually, so far to me, has been able to give any clarity on how Trump's actually really affecting people's votes. Is it enough for people to change their vote from what they were thinking before the change of prime ministers?
Yes, Charles, absolutely. Of course, you're joining us from Australia, where you're also in the closing stages of a federal election, but the system is slightly different in Canada compared to where you are, with first past the post, but also an early ballot voting, which has seen record numbers. Why do you think this election and this year early voting has been at a record high?
Oh, because it's becoming easier and easier to do early voting. In fact, you can go online and register, and you'll always receive in the mail, well in advance, all the material, everything that you need to vote for. You fill it up, you send it in, and you get an acknowledgement in the mail. Now, I'm not sure about Canada, but in Australia, it's compulsory voting. So if you don't vote, you get a fine, and you have to pay a fine later on unless you've got a good excuse. So everybody likes to get it out of the way.
Yes, absolutely. In Canada, there isn't compulsory voting. That is the key difference. Charles Thompson, thank you very much for joining us and discussing this election as the polls are open. Just to bring you some more information in, we mentioned at the top of